a very important, sorry, I have to kill it, to a very important topic. This is gender equity and career structures in higher education institutions. We will make use of some data advanced made in the European Tertiary Education Register to provide at least some original insight into these important matters and to nurture a policy discussion. I have to mention that okay. With the RISIS research infrastructure project, with whom we are sharing many important activities on providing robust data for European higher education and science policy. All that said, the topic is of high relevance for the European policy in higher education, and then it's my pleasure to give to Kinga Sully the word for introducing from the Commission side. Kinga, the word is to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I just had to find the unmute button. As you might already heard in previous occasions at the previous presentations, the communication on a European strategy for universities, which was adopted in 2022, foresees a European framework for attractive and sustainable careers in higher education in synergies with the research careers framework that's under development for the European research area. This framework is very important for reaching the priorities of the European strategy for universities, because without a proper framework and attractive and sustainable careers, it's not achievable, all those goals that we set for the European strategy for universities. In this context, what we are currently working on is a draft Council recommendation for this European framework for attractive and sustainable careers in higher education, which aims to promote, recognize, and valorize the diversity of academic roles, including innovative teaching and learning. It also seeks to promote, recognize, and valorize mobility and deep and social cooperation for academics, and to promote attractive working conditions, academic freedom, diversity, and gender equality. Currently, we are conducting a study to set the most important elements for this upcoming Council recommendation. We have also just finalized a short survey among academics to see the most pressing issues within this framework, and we are planning to start also a consultation process, or we are already conducting a consultation process. So we plan further steps in that towards this Council recommendation early next year. Of course, it's not possible to have a proper evidence-based policymaking without evidence, without data. So for that, we are really counting on the latest developments within ETER to support our goals, and later to make it possible to see the implementation of this, if that is the Council recommendation. So I don't want to speak much longer, because I think it's much more important to get into the discussion. So I give back the floor to you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion for today.
So thank you so much, and really Thank you for this incredible support ETER got in the last 10 years, which brings us where we are to provide some insights. And now we reached almost 60 participants, which is an excellent starting points for a lively discussion. And then I would like to give the floor to Andrea Bonacorsi, who made all the preparations and who has been one of the founding fathers of ETER, to explain the program and to head into the substantive discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Benedetto. Good afternoon to everybody. From the initial speech of King Azzuli, you already get the importance of the topics we are discussing this afternoon. We will deal with two dimensions of the issue of academic careers and the notion of sustainable academic careers. One will be a specific dimension of diversity that it deals with the gender equity, and in particular the issue of the role of women in academic careers. And the second point will be a look at the composition of the academic career to give insights on the structure of the steps of academic career and the openness of it to the accessibility and sustainability of the academic career. We will do this by using microdata. That is, not with an aggregate approach, which is in a sense already well known, but with a micro-based approach in which we try to examine data for each individual university in the European landscape. This will be done after a presentation from myself in a few moments, and then we will open a couple of round tables. The first round table will deal with the gender equity issue, and the second one will be on the structure of career. At the end of each of the two round tables, there will be some time for discussion from the floor. You might use the chat or the microphone, and then for comments by David Crozier, who is an expert from the Commission and the RISIS initiative that has been working for years on issues of careers, and we thank him for attending the webinar and giving his comments. And at the end, there will be a wrap-up. The format is highly informal. We will mainly open discussion and open questions without any attempt to arrive at some formal proposition. And then I will introduce the speakers after this initial presentation, where my goal is just to show you a very simple selection of data from the ETER. I hope you can see the slides, right? So what is ETER? ETER is the European Tertiary Education Register. That is a census of European higher education institutions, including all universities, that is PhD granting institutions, and a very large number of non-university higher education institutions across all European countries, not only in the European Union, but also in a number of accession countries and associated countries. It has been established as a collection of data from national statistical authorities, so it has the power and the legitimation from the and the statistical authorities agree to share not only aggregate data, but individual data. That is data in which we have name and surname of universities. Over the years, this collection has gained legitimation, coverage, popularity, and after the leadership of Benedetto also has included other countries and enlarged the spectrum. Just to introduce to you the two roundtable. The first one on the gender issue will be run by Frederick Sachwald, who is the director of the Observatoire des Sciences Techniques in Paris, Cinzia D'Araio from the University of Rome La Sapienza, and Alesia Zuccala from the University of Copenhagen. And we thank them for finding time to look at the data and give their opinions and their comments. And after them, we will open a discussion and then learn about comments by David Crozier. The second round table will be run by Thomas Esterman from the European University Association, then Tatiana Fumasoli, sorry for the pronunciation, Tatiana, director of the Center for Education Studies at the University College in London, and Marek Kiwiek, director of the Institute for Advanced Studies in Social Sciences and Humanities at the University of Poznan. And again, open discussion and David providing his comments. My task is very simple. I have a few minutes to show you the main findings from the data. My apologies to everybody. After 2 years of lockdown connections, still sometimes we have unexpected problems. So that was the first round table. The second round table, as I told you, the speakers and will be mainly on the career structure, but I ask speakers to feel free to be open to any comments they have in mind. The first point of our evidence deals with the proportion of women in total academic staff. We calculate on the basis of the individual data that university employ more than 1,300,000 academic personnel, of which 44% female. So the proportion of women is still smaller than the proportion of women in the student population and the PhD population, but it's still quite significant. Although only roughly 1/4 of universities have a proportion of women greater than 50%. It's interesting to go into some detail in the distribution of the universities which have the largest proportion of women. We typically find small universities, relatively young, specialized, with a good concentration in Eastern European countries, but with a specialization in mostly humanities and medicine. While if we look at the bottom part of the distribution, that is university with the smallest share of women, we find, probably not surprisingly, almost all large technical universities in Europe, in many countries, from Weihen to EPFL in Switzerland to Karlsruhe in Germany to the polytechnics in Italy. And we also find the specific model of advanced institutes, for example, in Italy, that are mostly devoted to STEM. And of course, again, not surprisingly, military and some pontifical universities. So some possible suggestions for interpretation may be more on the subject mix. If we examine the share of women by size of the university, we see a large dispersion of points. So it doesn't seem that the number of total academic personnel that you read on the horizontal axis is associated in any significant way to the share of women. Now, where is the problem of gender equity or equality? Is not only on the share of women in the total population, but is in the difference between the share of women in total academic population and the share of women in senior positions. By senior positions, ETER considers the label, the positions that in many countries are on top of the academic ladder, as collected and standardized by the OECD. So after a long period of discussion, and we will have in the panel and the roundtable people that have been actively engaged into this standardization effort, there has been an agreement on what we mean by senior positions. Now, women are 28% of senior positions and 44% of total academic population. So this creates a difference that we can measure one by one, university by university. Okay. So, for example, if you want to know how many universities do have a share of senior women that is similar to the share of women in total population, it's only 75. So a very small number out of the total population of universities we are in the data set. It is true that the share of women in senior positions is moderately associated with the share of women in total academic personnel. Again, maybe this is not probably surprising. And we suggest to build up a new indicator. This indicator is very, very simple. It's just the difference at the level of individual university between the share of women in the academic staff of that university and the share of women in senior positions in that university. So we will have a micro-based indicator that characterizes the structure of the career for women at the level of the individual university. If we plot this distribution across the population of ETER universities, we find an interesting number. That is only 3.5% of universities do have a positive index, that is a share which is at least equal between the position in senior and the position in total academic population, while 96.5% have a negative indicator. Okay, now we believe this indicator might be interesting for discussion on one hand, because we can do research to try to examine possible antecedents of this number. So it's an avenue of interest for research, but also for policy making, and also for individual universities. Very preliminary data. It seems that the gender equality does not really depend on size, but anyway, larger universities find it more difficult to have equality. If you look at the top panel, you see that the size is on the vertical axis. The largest universities are almost on the negative side. And on the contrary, if we look at PhD intensity, we see some relation. That is, university with the largest PhD intensity have most likely a negative index. Okay. Now this is for the gender. Now, second evidence we take from data and we offer to discussion is the breakdown of total academic populations by categories, in which, according to the OECD proposal, we have 3 categories: senior, intermediate, and junior. Junior includes the postdoc, plus a category called other academic personnel that is mostly part-time personnel, mostly in teaching or research, but on a part-time basis. While if we look at the other three categories, my personal suggestion is to take it as a 50% rule. That is, senior 12% as almost half the intermediate, 21, 22%, which is more almost 50% of the junior position. So we have a classical pyramid-like structure in the part of the academic population that is most likely have tenure, or that's another area for further research and investigation, are more likely candidate for a permanent career. And again, we offer this data to the discussion, asking whether we will that structure as meeting the requirements that the Commission declared with Kinga at the start of our webinar. Further work, we can do a lot of work in combining this data, examining by breakdown by country, region, city, or many other geographic connotation, but also to study the flows. These data are the stock of academic population at the end of 2020. We can continue the work by measuring the flows. That is how the stock of population changes over time, whether gender equality is going to increase or not, whether the composition of career structure is going to change or not, with a more dynamic approach. And then we can also combine this data with external data to work more on potential antecedents. I would like to stop my my slides. Again, apologies for the technical issues that we have had, and then immediately open the discussion. The discussion will be informal mainly. I would like to follow the same list that we have on the program. So please, Frederick Sachwald, I'm happy to leave you the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to participate. Thank you to ETER for this invitation. So if we look at the your result, I have really noticed the importance of disciplines as far as the gender imbalance is concerned, which is, well, a confirmation of things we know. So in my comments, I'll have two parts. One is an illustration of this imbalance in one STEM discipline, that is mathematics in France. And the second one is comments and suggestions about the indicator itself. So on the first point, HCRES, the agency in France for evaluation of higher education and research, the OST, the Science and Technology Observatory, is a department of this agency, and the agency has conducted a large national study on mathematics last year, so both with a committee and with bibliometrics. So, and so what the result is a confirmation of the fact that France is very specialized as a country in mathematics. It has a relatively high share of its research and publications in math. And what is interesting too is that it has a quite good geographical distribution of mathematics over the territory. But then the gender imbalance is quite strong and persistent. And it's much lower than the figures you have there. So it's for math in France overall. It's not one university. The share of women in academic personnel in math in France is about 25%. So it's both for university and public research organizations. It's the lowest share among disciplines, along with computer science. It has been quite constant over the last 15 years. And it has also a stronger imbalance of bias for senior positions, where you have 15%. So 25% for academic personnel overall in France and 15% for senior positions. And it appears twice less probable for women to access a senior position as compared to a man. So it's really an illustration of this gender imbalance in one STEM discipline. Now I come to comment on the indicator, and my comment, as you will see, is influenced by this disciplinary issue. The first comment I have is about the name of your indicator, because it's not a gender equality to me. It's at least gender bias, and it also focuses on senior positions as opposed to the average. So it does not include in what the indicator looks at. It does not really include the junior imbalance. So I would have a comment on the name. Then what types of other indicators we could wish to calculate? Based on this disciplinary issue, I would suggest to measure the overall share of women, but to normalize by discipline, so that you could really compare disciplines and institutions across disciplines. So you would have you would correct for the average of the discipline for one institution, for example. That could be one alternative. So you would be at the general level. In that case, you would not focus on seniors. Now, if you focus on senior personnel, well, the difference between overall share of women and share in the senior positions, I would suggest to have a slightly more complicated formula, that is to make the difference between the average and senior. In your case, 44 minus 28, but to divide by 44, to have a variation between 0 and 1, and to take into account that number, that overall share. For example, if you take your case, 44 minus 28 over 44, it's 0.36. And if I do the same thing for the math in France, it's 0.4. So I think it does capture the fact that the level is overall lower in France. So these are two suggestions about the indicator. And I think it may be possible with the data that we have to do this sort of thing. Well, these were my first comments.
Okay, Fredericks, many thanks. So on one hand, you suggest to go more deeply into the structure of discipline and recalculating the indicator by discipline. And second, you also give methodological suggestions about how to normalize the number. Okay. Thank you very much. At the end, we will try to keep on board these suggestions for further work. Cinzia D'Araio, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And before going to give some comments and thoughts, let me thank the organizers, and in particular Professor Bonaccorsi, for his invitation. It's really a great pleasure for me to be here and to participate in this interesting workshop. I will assume that we all agree on the main ideas, and so I will focus my comments or short contribution on some points, trying to be a little bit provocative to stimulate the discussion, considering the broad topics that are beyond this workshop, considering the linking that was done at the beginning, connecting the promotion of excellence with the quality, with the available data and information on academic staff and gender. All these, of course, is not easy and not obvious. So I will start posing some kind of provocative questions. And I will start by starting with what do we mean by excellence? Because if we have to promote excellence, we should know what we could consider excellence and what do we really know about excellence in academia. Then the second question is about the meaning of gender equality. What do we mean by gender equality? And if we think can be a contradiction between gender equality and gender equity and diversity and equity. So is this something that we can consider in a bit more critical way? The third question, I would say, there is the saying that we all agree on, that is to measure what counts instead of what can be counted. So is this always valid? And what can we say in this context? And finally, a last provocative question. I can ask because I am a female, so I can ask if having more women in academia is always good. Can we also consider these questions? And before leaving the floor also for the discussion of the other member of the panel, let me try to answer to these provocative questions also on the basis of some recent research. The concept of excellence, I think, is a quality that is very difficult to define. But when you meet excellence in an academic, you recognize it. And so it's important to understand the excellence of academic practices, but to do this, we have to abandon a kind of ideological conception about evaluation. Usually you have supporters of those that are in favor of evaluation or against evaluation. And in some recent research, we talk about having a good assessment, because if you do a good assessment, this means that you are able to consider the essential elements of the academic practices, and you include also what are the stable qualities, the characters of the academics, so you can also investigate what excellence and define better, conceptualize better the idea of excellence. And this is connected to the virtues, the idea of virtues. About the second question about equality, of course, we all agree that there is no worse injustice if we consider equal things that are instead different. And so we have to reconcile, or we have to better define what we mean by gender equality, considering maybe it's gender equity, because we have to combine this with the idea of having a diversity in which each individual, and you can really enhance the role of each individual and also of each academic within the in the academic organization of work. And it is also important to distinguish the different roles that are involved when you work in academia, because we have a very strong evidence that there are inequalities, differences among the scholars in terms of production, but also there is another important difference in terms of the role that they have. And in fact, we can also change a little bit the characters, or define different figures of academics. We define, for instance, the leader, the good researchers, the honest researchers, different kind of researchers that contribute to the advancement or to the main achievement of what are the ends of the research practice. And so it is important also, if we want to discriminate between what are good research practice and bad research practice. Of course, this is a broader concept, but it is connected also with the empirical analysis and also with the empirical evidence that we have just heard. And in particular about this, of course, everybody thinks that the famous saying, to measure what counts and not what can be counted, is valid. But I would say provocatory, in this context, in our empirical context, most of the time, we do not have the data to address what really counts. And so what we could do in a kind of pragmatic way, we could just turn off this old saying and say that sometimes if we measure what does not count, it's not really relevant, but because we have data, we can still say something that is interesting. And on this, for instance, I can just cite some kind of analysis that we were doing, considering the size and role of non-academic staff. Because of course, non-academic staff in terms of production of academic activities is less relevant. But if you discover that the role of and size of non-academic staff in academia is predominant, and there are some other marginal aspects that have an important role, this could be really important to connect to what really can be interesting to measure, and you do not have the information and the data to measure. And in fact, on the role of non-academic staff, I would say, in terms of connection with the performance of university, there is not a lot of evidence, but could be really interesting to go deeper on this aspect. And finally, the last provocative question: do we think that really having more women in academia is always good? This is also, there is an interesting areas about gender studies that consider the so-called Queen Bee syndrome. And this was introduced in the organizational behavior studies in 1974 by Steins et al. And basically this Queen Bee syndrome indicates that the tendency of women to underestimate the abilities and ambition of other women, especially if junior, as a career advancement strategy adopted in a kind of male-dominated organizations to contend with gender stereotypical expectations. So sometimes, of course, what would be interesting to check and to go deeper could be also to consider if really having more women, for instance, in the evaluation committees of young academics, could even be more counterproductive for the women that are going to be evaluated. And I think with this, I would stop my critical questions and see what do you think. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cinzia. I think we should take seriously your provocations. Having the same number of women in different positions may not be in itself a good measure of equity and equality. At the same time, you should continue your contribution by thinking about the possible endogeneity of the problem. That is, maybe young researchers that are women find it more difficult to advance in career because of the structure of the gender gap, and they may give up more intensely than men. And that would be against your notion of virtue, because these probably virtuous people might find it more difficult to show their virtue. But again, your provocation is very interesting. You want us to reason in terms of the potential, the human potential of researchers, rather than only the numbers, and to take a larger, if you want, a philosophical approach to the notion of justice. Okay, so very serious provocation. Thank you. We have to go ahead on this reflection. And then Alesia Zuccala from the University of Copenhagen. Alesia will have a few slides to support this discussion, and we are now entering into very, very hot issues. So Alesia, please.
Can you, hello, hi everyone. Thank you. I really appreciate being here. It's wonderful. Can you enable share screen for me? Oh, perfect. Okay. Okay. So I can assure you that I only have 5 slides, so it's not a full presentation. And these are some things that I've thought about, and I prefer visuals, so I hope you don't mind that I took a chance to make some slides. So these are the themes that I think we need to reflect on. And the ETR data concerning gender, I think it needs some kind of enrichment at the cross-section of international mobility, and I guess preferably in Europe, because it's European. Although there is mobility back and forth between the US and North America and also Europe. And it would be interesting to find out where the exodus and incoming is going. I think now what I've noticed, and it's just a hunch or something that I'm thinking about, that there's a lot of emphasis now on early career researchers. And I think that this push and this emphasis is allowing young women to climb faster. And so I suspect that we should look at the age at which women now are obtaining full professorships. Because I think there could be a current generation of older women that we might call the lost generation, women who have had slow and steady careers, but didn't feel that there was that much of a push to do what you call early career grant applications and all that kind of thing. I mean, I can vouch for that as a woman now. I don't remember the push or people saying, apply for grants, do this, do that. I don't remember it as being as intensive as it is today. And the other issue would be hidden variables that can be difficult to operationalize, like unconscious bias and bias training, stereotyping, moral licensing, etc. So again, just let me look at this idea of cross-section of international mobility. So we have these terms endogamy, or exogamy, where the best students are encouraged to remain in the place where they are trained. And this is quite common in Scandinavia, Sweden, Denmark. But the rule of thumb, for example, in North America, where I came from, is you absolutely did not stay at the university where you graduated with a PhD. So you must move from one place to another. So it would be interesting to find out what are these cultural norms across Europe. The problem with international mobility is that mobile academics are sometimes expected to do the dirty work. And this could be connected to structures of power. So it's okay, you can come join us, but here we just get you to do, data cleaning or this kind of thing in our, as a postdoc in our section. When we look at critical mass and recruitment, the increased recruitment of women internationally has been mistakenly applied to mean cohesion. So you may have equality in terms of representation, but it doesn't mean that there's cohesion. And that's a big factor. And this means that in many cases, national identity takes precedence over gender. So you might have women, traveling or being dispersed in distant location, but if there's this national identity, it can weaken this positive effect of increase of welcoming women into labs, etc., or departments. And resource access is also influenced by homophily. So whoever's in charge of resources, whether it be, like the homophily of nationalism, or people who are from that country, they understand the resources better and manage them better. Sometimes it's primarily men, not always, but they tend to interact and reward people with similar gender and ethnicity. So just as an example, I show gender at the cross-section of international mobility. I found this list of female professors employed at the University of Copenhagen between 1946 and 2012. And as I browse through the list, I see mainly Danish names. So we can say that perhaps also with this percentage or proportion, there's also a lot of homophily in terms of who actually gets these professorship positions. So it doesn't bode well for a woman who moves from one country to another at all. Early career is receiving more focus today than earlier. So I don't know, we should look at the average age in which now women are getting professorships. And to my mind, it seems that they're getting younger and younger. And in fact, Denmark's youngest female professor was appointed at the age of 33. So I find that excellent, but also disturbing, because it means that it's not so good for a woman if you're, you know, slow and steady. It's like you have to shoot out of the cannon very fast and be a superstar very young. And yeah, I don't know. It seems to me like when I was young, all the older professors were sort of seasoned and much older. And today it seems like everything's faster. So yeah, these are things I'm concerned. And then again, hidden variables. Well, I guess this corresponds a little bit to what Cinzia said, like, let's look at what else we can, I'm not sure if I got it right. She said it sort of differently. Can you rephrase, can you tell me, Cinzia? It was like what we can measure.
Yes, it's the old saying, if we only it's not what we measure that counts, but we have to try to measure what counts, not
We
what
have to measure, so we have to decide what counts. And
Yes.
I actually agree with that. But to add to that, I would like to say that we actually sometimes know more than what can be measured. And I would just like to introduce this. It's a very quick and short blog that you're welcome to read. And it's about when it comes to gender inequality, we actually know more than what could be measured. So there's a lot of underlying issues that are extremely subtle and extremely difficult to erase. I'm sure that if you ask fellow female colleagues, they will tell you of little struggles that they've had where they felt they could feel a systematic feeling of something that's not quite right. So this has always been the longstanding issue. So I won't harbor on that anymore. I'll just say these are basically the three things that I wish to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you, Alesia. You added the new dimensions to our discussion. Hidden variables, the issue of the speed of career. It's a fascinating issue. We might think about whether ETER data could be used in the future to measure the flows, although we don't know anything about the age at which people are recruited and promoted. There is probably clearly a need to generate new indicators. And then the issue of combining gender issues with international mobility. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Very interesting topics as well. Okay, also thank you very much for being very sharp and concise. So we have time for discussion. Then I would like to give you the floor for a second round. I see Tatiana, please. You may want to, Tatiana will be a speaker in the second round table, but anyway, all of you that may take the floor, if you want to just introduce yourself, that would be great to make your knowledge. Tatiana, please.
Yes, so thank you very much for this invitation, and particularly for speaking in the next round table. But allow me to make a few comments or questions on the possible use of the ETER data based on your presentation and on the contributions of the speakers. So I was wondering if it is possible to calculate in the indicator that the size, because I found interesting that the size of universities is kind of loosely related actually to a more negative representation of women. And I was wondering if this again is related to disciplines, because usually larger universities have a more STEM, although they also have a more medicine, in which we know women are more represented. But I was thinking that maybe disciplines that could also be considered in their mix, and then we can see better where women are more affected, negatively affected, or maybe even positively affected. Then the second, so I have 3 questions. And then the second question is again about, so we know that the problem, there is a problem of representation of women in so senior and junior and so on, but there is also a problem of representation of women in high status universities. And I know that we all don't want to recognize that universities are different, but for instance, could the ETER database be used, or the data be used in combination with, let's say, the first top of 100 universities in global rankings that are in the ETER database, and how women do fare in those universities? I would expect that the situation is even worse, because the higher the status, the more male representation. That would be my hypothesis. And then finally, I just wanted, so yeah, there has been some discussion about differences in time, and I think that we can all agree that it has become more and more competitive to enter an academic career and to be promoted in an academic career. And it's quite difficult even to compare what was happening 10 years ago to what is requested now for new entrants in the academic career. So I think, so related to that, I was wondering whether with the data you can also integrate an hypothesis on time lag. So it's not that the women have always been there all the time. So for instance, now we recognize that maybe there are more female early career researchers. It means that in 5-10 years, probably we can expect more female professors. And I think I would be interested to see how universities do over time. Because it's not that women have always been there and have always been negatively affected. So there is probably a time lag, and on this I'm quite hopeful that I think it should be measured. So that was it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. Very interesting suggestions. I will like to continue the discussion, opening the floor to everybody. Take the floor, take the opportunity of this window of discussion. And Andrea Lotter, please. Andrea, we don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now
okay.
we hear you.
Sorry, I had some problems with my micro. Thanks for this workshop and for presenting the ETER data, which I find are really interesting. I'm working on gender equality in Germany, and I'm part of the statistical correspondence for the chief figures, which is not in the DG education, but in the DG research. So it's really interesting to have a look on these data for single universities. I have 2 remarks. I think you make this relation. I think it's really interesting to have a look on the geographical level, because of the she figures. We know that there are huge differences in the representation of women in different countries. So I think this would be worth to integrate in your analysis for the different universities. And some remarks on for the indicator, I think it's a really good idea to make this relation between senior academics and the total of academics. In Germany, we invented a ranking, and we call this cascade model, and we make a relation between the highest positions and the PhD students in the same institution, because this is also a possibility not to go into the disciplines, which is quite necessary, but to normalize analyze the effect of disciplines, because normally in a university where you have a high amount of female students, this might be a university where there are more humanities and social sciences and the other way around. So when you make I think your indicator is quite good to calculate this effect of disciplines and different types of universities. Concerning the time lag, I'm a little bit more pessimistic than Tatjana, because we have also made some calculations with recruitment data and flow data. And when we make this relation, we show that there is a progression, but compared to who enters the universities, that there are more and more female students, the time lag is, it's not really going to equity, but just the level is quite higher. But in Germany, for 20 years, there's always the difficulty or the break between the PhD and the professors. And this the percentage of the share of female professors is augmenting, but not in the same, not higher or more than it is for the PhDs. So I'm a little bit, I think it's not always time lag, but coming from my situation, I think it's also, we need some policies. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Again, very interesting contribution to the discussion. I just go around to see whether I see other hands raised before leaving the floor to David. Okay, do the speakers, Frederick, Cinzia, and Alesia, need to add other comments?
Sorry, Andrea. There are Maria Christina who raised her hand, and I think also Alesia who raised her hand in her screen.
Great.
Sorry for this.
I try to you are so many that I may lose you when I go across the list. So who is taking the lead? Please take the floor, not wait for me.
Hello, I just have one small comment about this indicator that you propose. So you want to look at the ratio between the full professors and the entry level of women, like the proportions, if I have this correct.
Andrea suggested to measure a ratio between professors and PhD students, right?
Yeah, so the number of PhD students and then the number of professors, only women, like as a proportion. So the proportion of PhD students, men, women, and then to the proportion of men, women, full professors. Okay, so I do have one comment about that, and that is in some countries, and I know in Denmark, it's all prorated. They determine already the percentage of professors allowed in the system, the percentage of associates, and the percentage of assistant professors. And it's all, what do you call it, prorated. There can be no more of each or no less of each. So I don't know, I guess that doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think this doesn't matter. It's not the numbers, but it's a ratio. It's a share of women. So I think this. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's right. So even if it's a small percentage that's allowed to be full professor, it would still be the ratio. You're right. So sorry about that. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, I see Maria Cristina. Please, Maria.
Thank you so much. We presented our work not so many time ago in a meeting of professors of health sciences, in which we compared the number of rectors in all the histories of the universities in our region, and it was like abysmal. So the point is not only attaining the seniority, which is hard enough. It's not only the glass ceiling, it's the sticky floor. But the point is, when you arrive to dean or the vice dean or the director of studies or director of department, are you really you have the option of taking real decisions, or are you the lovely lady that will take care of the problems with the students or something like that? So it's not only the seniority, it's the capacity of taking decisions, of making decisions, of being in the heart of it. And unfortunately, the image we had of the state in Catalonia was a little bit like a disaster. So something has to be done, not only accelerating the work of this, of our group of colleagues, which are really very dynamic and very, very brilliant, but not maybe the idea is not to, let's say, automatically give the lady in the direction the tasks that have been always declared for the ladies, the care, the special situations, and so and so and so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria Cristina. Very pertinent comment. Frederick, Cinzia, do you have something to add rapidly?
Well, I think that the pessimism of Andrea is really dovetails with what I've said about mathematics, about the last 20, 25 years. And actually in France, this situation of a low, well, there is a microphone which should be closed. This low share of women is felt by the mathematical community in France as a threat to the whole community, because the community has an attractiveness issue. And so now they're turning towards women because there are so few women, so it's on top of the lack of attractiveness for the whole community. So it's just what I wanted to add.
Okay, thanks.
I don't have anything to add. I'm just curious to see how the discussion will evolve when we will go to the next, to address the next topic. So I think it is really stimulating. So.
Okay, so before leaving the floor to David Crozier, I take as many as 5 or 6 already strong suggestions on how to improve the indicators and continue the analysis. First, to normalize the gender indicators by discipline. So go more deeply into the issue of STEM and to characterize universities in terms of their subject mix and prevalence of STEM versus other disciplines. Technically, this will create a little bit underrepresentation because the data by discipline includes some missing. But overall, I think that combining this data from ETER to gender and academic position will still give us a large coverage. Second, you want to cross the data with international mobility. That's another data included in ETER. That is the proportion of academic staff that comes from abroad. That might be another line of investigation suggested by Alesia. Then number 3, you clearly want to know more about size. Size may be correlated in some sense to subject mix, but it's not the same. So we have to investigate much much more whether there is a specific difficulty of larger universities to offer more opportunities of senior career to women. Then you have a suggestions by the high status universities. I have to tell Tatiana that will be a highly controversial issues, but we keep it on the debate. Number 5, many of you asked to give a stronger dynamic flavor to the analysis. That is to see also the flows, to have some way to examine the recruitment, that is the change in the stock. I now leave the floor to Benedetto that will tell you, but this is exactly what ETER is trying to do. For the time being, we have 10 years of time series of data. Unfortunately, not all of them have the breakdown we would like to have, but in the future, there will clearly be something possible. That is to examine the changes in the stock of academic population in order to take into account also the gender. Number 6, geographic level. That is to do breakdown by country, possibly by other geographic or institutional characterization. So the agenda is already busy for the next months and years. In addition to more conceptual issues, that is, what do we mean by equity, equality, and justice? What do we mean by endogeneity and hidden variables? So we still need to do more theoretical and conceptual work on this issue. Benedetto, please.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Okay, so thank you. This was a very interesting discussion. And I will not tell you that what exactly ETER will do, because ETER is collecting data. It's not analyzing all this interesting issue. We are doing a very modest work. But listening from outside, this shows me, in my view, shows how important it is to use data like the ones ETER is providing. Because I'm listening and I could enter into discussion, say, hey, we have a faculty here in Lugano with 2 professors with female, they feel a problematic situation, it's etc. But most of our knowledge is anecdotal, because we are looking in our environment, in our country, in our university, and we see patterns. This is right, this is interesting, but the question is about generalizability, but even more is about differences in patterns. So what, Andrea, you correctly hinted to, with gender imbalance is different depending on the disciplines, but depending on, for example, in status. Do we found more female academic personnel because it's beyond the university, outside the university sector, or do you find them mostly in the art schools or even in Oxford, in the top-ranked university, etc.? So there is some value, and I'm interpreting what people call evidence-based politics in looking to the data across Europe and looking to difference and patterns. And what ETER will probably never be able to do is to analyze flows, but to associate characteristics of institutions to their gender balance. This is, of course, possible. And now we start having 10 years of data. As Andrea said, not all detailed breakdowns are there for all 10 years, but at least the overall breakdown of academic personnel by gender is there in most countries for 10 years. So we can see what changes. And of course, you might say in Ireland, we have better national data. And I'm sure in Switzerland, we have better national data than ETER. But the question is what is happening on the European landscape, and whether there are differences, there are laggards, institutions progressing more or less. So I think there is some data work which can be done. and which is complementary to the more general observations or the more theoretical reflections or the more sociological reflection on career structure around. So that's my message coming from the data side of this game. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Benedetto. I see David Rosier. Maybe David can give us his perspective on the first roundtable.
Happy to do so, Andrea. Thank you.
Okay.
So, I mean, first of all, thanks so much for the workshop, because I think it's at least this first roundtable has been really fantastic, really interesting. What I think I just want to pick up from where Benedetto left off at first, because I think the first thing to kind of say is how much more we can already get from ETER than a few years ago. So so already the development, I think, has been really important. So for example, I remember a few years ago, we didn't have the breakdown by senior, intermediate and junior categories of staff. So so now we are able to kind of come up with using data that's available at micro level across every institution in a more sophisticated way than possible. Of course, whenever you have some data, of course, it's going to generate the desire for more, you know, that you want to go further and deeper into it. But I think we should recognize that already having at European level, the sophistication of data that now we have in ETER is a really big step forward. And I think there's been, you know, a lot of great work behind the development of ETER in order to get to this point. So so we need it, and it's great that it's there. I'll just give a couple of comments on some of the things that have been said. I mean, I agree with that it would be very nice to kind of, as Frederic proposed, to kind of have an additional look at data from the point of view of indicators that are more focused on discipline. So I think that's, for me, that's a really good suggestion. I'm not talking about the particular technical way of developing it and which indicator is best or whatever, because I think it's also very good that you have the index as you proposed it with the total versus the senior female staff. So I think you know, these are complementary, not choices. But it's good to interrogate data from with different questions. Just on the discussion of discipline, I think it's also important more at a policy level, not only to be focused on STEM, which is very significant, I completely agree, but I think there are also issues, and maybe this kind of comes to Cinzia's question about is it better to have more, always better to have more women? There are also questions where we have disciplines which are completely overrepresented by female academic staff and students, and particularly in humanities, teacher training area, I think there's very clear evidence of that, and that's leading us now to a situation where certainly school level teachers are really increasingly, that profession is increasingly feminized, and I think we have to look at that. You know, it's I'm not so data can be looked at from with different questions, and I agree that it's a lot of gender issues and issues which act as a break to kind of female careers are really important to see the data, and then to see what we can do at policy level to address it. So I think yeah, that comes to the point of Benedetto, that if you want evidence-based policy, you need the evidence. So so let's get it and improve it, and make sure that we can look at how things evolve over time, which I think is also the real benefit going forward with ETER, that we'll be able to see the trends and see how things change across Europe. So I think you know, that's really what I wanted to say for now, right? I think, you know, we really need to have good evidence on what's happening in higher education institutions. We really need to understand the careers structures that we're going to discuss now. And if you want to have policies that are effective, you need to have the evidence behind it of where the issues really are. So, and it's right that ETER will only give you a kind of relatively superficial view of the issues at European level, which can be drilled down to more specifically in national and institutional contexts. But that European comparison is important, and we need it. So thank you very much for everything, you know, to get us to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for your comments. Yes, the issue of discipline requires more work. The data are promising. They come from classification of students and academic staff in standardized definitions of categories. So they will leave some room for doing better work. Also, the idea that there are some disciplines that are over feminized may be interesting to follow. Of course, as Benedetto said, in fact, in ETER, there will not be possible to track flows, because we only track the stock at the end of the year as measured by the National Statistical Authority. So the difference between two stocks will in fact be a mix between exit and entry, exit of retired people, entry of new people, recruitment. So there will be many flows that we will not be able to track, okay, analytically, right? So we don't have to promise the moon. At the same time, if we were able to track for several years changes in the composition, normalized by discipline and with many controls, like the geographic, the institutional, the size, and so on and so forth, then we might do a better work. And I agree with you that data generate hunger for more data. That's of course a challenge for those that produce the data, but there are also very positive feedback in the use of data, so that more difficult issues can be tracked. Don't forget the issue that we have a lot of endogeneity. That is, we need more micro based data with counterfactuals analysis on what is driving the aspiration of women towards academic research, whether they self-select themselves by discipline, they self-select when they are a PhD student, when they are postdoc. So there is a lot of conceptual issues that have to do with economic incentives, sociological reflections, cultural factors, education. So we are exactly dealing with something very challenging, okay? But to the extent that we explore the antecedents of this issue, then the ETER data will offer a robust background to test hypotheses. Okay, so thank you very much also for your challenges. Okay, so now we are perfectly on time to open the second roundtable, in which we deal with the issue of career structure. In the chat, someone asked about the references about the OECD work on this issue. This is available to everybody. Of course, we know that the definition of academic positions is an exoteric discipline in itself. Nobody knows exactly across all European countries the subtle differences between different labels, okay, of positions, but overall, the agreement on a tripartite structure, that is junior, intermediate, and senior, is almost everywhere accepted. So there might be differences across countries that require some better investigation, but the overall structure is relatively well understood. And now the issue is faced with the European Union movement towards a sustainable academic structure. That is an academic structure that opens opportunities for hardworking researchers and teachers that want to give a contribution to the university. Are we moving in the right directions? Are we creating a sufficiently large number of academic positions to give junior researchers opportunities? Don't forget the issue of old that Alesia mentioned, the old researchers. So are we generating a career structure which is equitable, open, competitive, and fair? Of course, our data will only start a discussion. There will not be, let's say, final answer. But the data still tell us something interesting in the proportion between the three layers of career: junior, intermediate, and senior, and the other positions, and the overall composition. So we are going to discuss this issue with the other three speakers. I repeat them: Thomas Esterman from the European University Association, Tatiana Fumasoli, and please, Tatiana, correct me for the pronunciation, director of the Center for Education Studies in London, University College, and Marek Kwijek, director in Poznan of the Institute for Advanced Studies. We have time for your discussion, and then again, we'll open the floor to everybody that wants to contribute. So, Thomas, please. And thank you again for joining us in this discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrea, and very much looking forward to this discussion. I want to approach this topic from maybe three angles, and if you allow me, also will reflect a little bit on the previous session, because those topics are very important for EUA. And we look both at gender and academic careers from very diverse perspectives, I would say. But let me start also with reflecting on what has been said in the previous session, and also what David said, the usefulness of data. And I think this briefing that you have provided is very good. And you said as well in the ending of the paper that it has different purposes. So first of all, it allows institutions to look where they are in relation to their peers. That is certainly a high added value, but it also allows policymakers at national and European level to look at the state of play and then reflect on certain policies and maybe also monitor progress. So I think the important starting point is that data from ETER and your briefing will be one source, and what we need in the future is maybe not necessarily, and David, I think I said it there, or Andrea, you said it, the appetite for more indicators and more data, but maybe also use what we have and analyze it and provide briefings like you have developed then, but also link it maybe to other data and context, and also zoom then in when you have identified certain good practices to look in more detail well, why is it that in certain systems or in certain institutions do better than others for both of these topics that we have been discussing, and then out of that come to where either policies can be developed or what institutional strategies and how to implement them can be put forward. Now, I think when it comes to careers, EUA promotes a holistic narrative on academic careers and academic assessment. We also look at developments that are taking place across Europe, but also internationally. And it's sort of really important to see, also detect trends and what works and what does not work. And what we've seen is that sometimes it's quite difficult from an institutional perspective also to shift the culture, because in many systems, universities do still not have actually the autonomy to make independent decisions on career, on promotions, and how this is developed. So I want to focus a little bit on some work that we have been doing on institutional autonomy, the autonomy scorecard, which is a tool that looks at the degree of autonomy that universities have, and we have analyzed 35 higher education systems. And just very recently, a couple of months ago, we published a new edition. And one of the dimensions that we look at is staffing autonomy, and we collect data on academic and administrative staff. We do not differentiate between the different levels, like you have explained, senior, intermediate, and junior staff, because indeed looking at that in addition to what we already collect on data is hugely complex. Andrea, you said it yourself, that is a science in itself. But I think therefore already what you do with this 3 level, that's already very useful. So what we look is as senior staff, and we look at the 4 following indicators. We look at the ability to decide on recruitment procedures. Secondly, the ability to decide on salaries, on dismissals, and the 4th one, the ability to decide on promotions. Now, I'm not going to present to you the full results. I recommend to you to look at the publication, but a couple of elements I think that might also be relevant for our discussion. So in 13 of the systems, the 35 systems that we look at, only 30 systems can actually have a higher degree of freedom to decide freely on the recruitment procedures for senior academic staff, and 22 systems do have some type of restrictions. They can range from either that they need an external confirmation of the appointment from an external authority, or that the number of posts is controlled externally, or that actually the recruitment is carried out by an external authority. So the number of posts, for example, is still regulated in systems like Croatia, Cyprus, France, Greece, Italy, Serbia, and Turkey. In other systems, human resource plans also need to be approved by ministries. This is the case, for example, in Slovenia. So you can see the idea of developing sustainable career paths is in many systems still regulated and restricted through different rules and regulations that actually hamper autonomous decisions by institutions in implementing their structure. But on the more positive side, I would say that we've also seen some more flexibility in this latest data collection. Sweden, for example, they have reached a collective agreement for making careers more attractive also to foreign researchers. Austria, for example, they have now something what they call opportunity hiring, also where 5% of academic staff can be hired in a more simplified process. In Poland, universities no longer need an external validation when they want to recruit academic staff. And in France, there used to be a very complex process of a peer evaluation to become a full professor, and also that has been simplified. So that is, I would say, on the positive side. Some other elements that maybe also restrict the hiring and developing career structures is the whole question of language restrictions in hiring careers and academic staff. Flanders and Latvia have, for example, very restrictive regulations and that. Other elements, for example, in Spain, where we have there's an accreditation system that makes it difficult for public universities to recruit international staff. So these are a couple of examples from the overall capacity to recruit. I could explain a little bit on the capacity to decide on salaries, which is also an important element to design attractive career structures. And there are only 6 systems. In 6 systems, universities can decide this freely. In many other systems, you have some sort of restrictions or given structures whereby universities cannot decide this freely. So maybe also an element for reflection of how important that is to design sustainable career structures. When it comes to promotion and free promotion, there are equally many restrictions. So very often this is linked to, again, the budget, and that there needs to be a post open at a higher level. So in order to move up the career structure, if there is no post available at a higher level, then universities, many systems cannot promote themselves. So that is clearly something that needs to be taken account of when we think about developing sustainable career structures. One element I would like to add, the challenge with staffing policies is that any changes towards regulations usually take a very long time to have an effect. Take, for example, Austria, where the abolition of civil servant status in 2001, respectively 2004, took a very long time to have an effect. We have actually seen in our data collection that now, 20 years after that abolition, you still have 20% of civil servants in the systems. So everything related to staffing policies and regulation takes a very long time. Now, let me just make a very brief connection with the institutional autonomy and also the question of gender equality and to the discussions before. Because I think the data that you've provided and and the indicator triggers interesting reflection. So someone might also want to look at how actually this links to institutional autonomy and the capacity of universities to make their own decisions about staffing and hiring academic staff. So what we did, I've asked my team to very quickly look at the data from ETER and see if there's a link between those systems where institutions have a higher degree of autonomy. So what we've done is we just filtered out all institutions that are not public universities because our autonomy scorecard looks at public universities, and we also filtered out smaller institutions for that purpose. So difficult to come to the conclusion that there is a strong connection with that, but what was interesting in terms of the percentage of female staff in universities, the first systems, the first top 10 systems are indeed those that have a higher degree of autonomy. The only exception would be France, which has in our scorecard a lower level of autonomy. And you also find at the bottom of the list systems that have a lesser degree of autonomy in staffing, with the exception of Switzerland and Poland. We also apply the indicator that you have proposed, and there things move a little bit around. So it's clear that it shows not everyone has the same pipeline towards senior staff. But what's interesting is that Austria, Latvia, Lithuania, and Finland would be still on the top of the list for both categories. So what might be interesting is to not draw too many strong conclusions on that, but rather say, okay, what's interesting in these 4 systems, and one might look a little bit closer what they can do. The last point that I want to make, and that refers to both elements, to careers and gender, the whole question of leadership and leadership development to support those policies and supporting particularly their implementation. We've also we're running, or we're partnering in a project which is called New Lead, which looks at leadership and transformation and how leadership development can support these big transformations. And one of these big transformations that always has been coming up is clearly under the broader umbrella of equity, diversity, inclusion, where also gender equity plays a very strong role, and careers equally very important in that aspect. And what has been, we've been running also focus groups, we've been doing data collections around that. And one of the key aspects that came out of that is that leadership development programs are essential for helping institutions to implement their strategies, be it in gender equity or also in developing careers. The problem with that is that we've also found that leadership development is still not the norm across Europe. And here we would really need to make a big step forward, that this is becoming much more the norm, and that these key topics, be it then equity, be it gender equality, be it developing appropriate and sustainable career structures, are really included in these development programs. Yeah, so to conclude with, and maybe also use something that has also been from another project where UA partnered with the Invited project, again looking at equity, diversity, inclusion, where the challenge that was identified is it's all about connecting the dots. So what are the dots? I think I very much would support data is very important, what has been said. But I would add to the equation, it's not just quantitative data, but also qualitative data is very important. So we might need people and resources that can actually analyze the data and use as a starting point, like you have prepared this briefing, but maybe also link it to other data sources to identify either good practices and then analyze why in some cases, some systems, some institutions do better than others. We clearly need policies at national and European level. Also when it comes to equity in careers, there are numerous policies around, for example, the ERA Forum, ERA Action 5 on promoting gender equality, or the BFG working groups on the social dimensions. I'm not going to go into all of that. So these are important fora and policies that also help moving the topic forward. And I would say, last but not least, as I mentioned, the whole further improvement and development and support for leadership development programs is really a key, and here there clearly is a role also at European level to look at this, how this can be sort of supported, that we have not two different levels in Europe where you have some systems where this is the case, where you have programs, and in others where this is not the case. Here Europe can also play a very important role.
Thank you very much, Thomas. So the issue of autonomy as an institutional driver of the organization of academic careers, that's very interesting. Also a suggestion to combine microdata with the country level indicators that come from your own long-standing prestigious analysis of autonomy with a scorecard of indicators. Very long impact. Other issue you raise, the reforms require decades to generate impact on the structure of career. Another interesting point. And leadership. I take the final comment as very interesting. We also had some comments in the previous roundtable about leadership as something of qualitatively important that is not captured perfectly by the data. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. We continue discussion on this fascinating problem of compositional career. Tatiana, please take the floor.
Thank you. I think I'm going to make again three comments, and the first two are about the United Kingdom, and then I have a more general comments on academic careers. So the first comment is that we have seen here in this country, in the national higher education system, a consolidation of the three paths of academic careers. Actually, we have an academic career or an academic pathway, which is both teaching and research. Then we have research-only contracts and teaching-only careers. And for instance, in my institution, one can go from the junior positions to the senior positions, so professorial positions in each one of the three careers. And this, as I said, has been increasingly consolidated. So as we know, it's probably an effect of the research excellence framework. So the most recent one was requiring universities to submit data on publications for all academic staff. So it was not possible anymore to select the most productive academic staff. And this clearly has pushed the universities to try and allocate staff that is better in teaching and maybe less productive for the research excellence framework. So exercise to move this staff towards teaching only contracts. However, there is also what I think is another policy drive in a system that I guess Thomas has identified in the report, highly autonomous in staffing, such as the UK. However, so the policy environment also has influenced very significantly the academic careers with the creation in particular of the Office for Students in 2018. And clearly, universities now are requested to be more and more accountable for the quality of teaching, for the quality of the student experience, etc. And this has created a real need to have academic staff and also administrative staff that is specialized in teaching. So both the requirements of the REF and the TEF, which is the Teaching Excellence Framework, and in general, the new policies of the Office for Students, I think they push the universities towards this three type of career pathways. So this is the first thing, and maybe what I would like to so mentioning research that we conducted in my center, and this was my now graduated PhD student Kayun Feng. So she looked in universities in East Asia, UK, and North America, and she looked also into teaching only and academic contracts. And interestingly, she found that so East Asia is more traditional. So it is teaching only careers that do not matter at all. So you need to publish and you need to get a proper academic career. The UK is more of a case of there is a debate going on whether these three pathways are legitimate and recognized and acceptable for everybody. And even more interestingly, actually, her case, which was in Canada, not in the US, showed that this type of career organization is widely accepted and, I would say, embraced, at least from the data she collected. So this is what I wanted to say, as it might be that this is happening only in the UK. We just heard that the next ref will not have probably the requirements anymore to integrate, so to submit all the academic staff publications. So maybe we will fall back to a system where a proper teaching and research career is the best one. But what I can see is that once probably academics are able to accept that being a teaching professor is as good as being an academic professor, then this seems to me the way forward. So a diversification of the functions within the career system. Then the second point, which, as I said, is still related to the UK. So there has been also recently a movement towards a more inclusive and diversified promotion criteria. This is not for all universities. Probably there are some universities that are more keen to do that. It depends on their mission. It depends also on their administrative capacity, probably. So what is being done is that the criteria for promotion, so as you said, from a lecturer to associate professor to full professor, are becoming diversified, and it's quite a long list. So it's not only research, publications and grants, but it is also teaching and teaching leadership. And then there is also what is called organizational citizenship, so services to the university, and enterprise activities, which I would say is third mission, generally speaking, so external engagements. And this means that also, how can I say, alternative careers can be considered to become a professor, and it's not necessary anymore to have a certain number of grants or possibly a certain number of high quality publications, when other criteria are included and make up for a case for promotion. So this is another recent development. But of course, here again we go back to the disciplines, and every department and faculty and discipline will interpret this long list of inclusive and diversified criteria in different ways. And so I don't think, so this is going on for some years now, probably still too early to understand whether it should be standardized overall, or maybe there is some leeway for every discipline, or maybe this, or maybe these disciplinary cultures and also organizational cultures, faculty cultures should be standardized better. But clearly, in a system that has as you know, in the UK, you can be appointed competitively, meaning by there is a call and you participate in the call, or if you achieve certain criteria, you can get promoted, and this is non-competitive as far as the person achieved the criteria. So in that sense, is a happier system. So what I wanted to say is just that in spite of all that, there has been recently a report from HEPI, which is the Higher Education Policy Institute, about the situation of academic staff in the UK. And although they report that academic staff is still overall well paid. Let's say the employment conditions are good in comparison with other sectors in the country, so not in comparison with other countries. However, there has been a significant rise on fixed-term contracts. And so I was looking now at the Higher Education Statistical Agency data. The latest data says 33% of academics in the UK are on fixed-term contract, which I think is really disturbing. So this was for the UK, which I think is trying some innovation, some innovative policy, or institutions are trying policies driven by Office for Students and by the REF. So my third comment is quite general, and I'm not sure, maybe here the ETER database could be even more helpful. And it is that when we look at academic careers, we should nonetheless look at the ecosystem of careers. And I'm talking here about the research careers. And I think if we don't understand what is happening, generally speaking, in research careers or in non-academic research careers, we cannot really understand or we cannot really have the best or most focused policies to improve the career systems. So what I mean by that, and here I'm gonna talk about other research that we are conducting, and actually my PhD student Yu Yang is attending this event. So we recently researched we did a systematic review on employment trajectories of PhD graduates, and it's quite interesting to see that there are. So, what does it mean when a PhD graduate is unable to get an academic career? Well, maybe they get better careers. Maybe they get still a research position and they can have a satisfactory career, maybe a better pay, better working conditions. And it is changing quite a lot. So on one side, because there are not enough places for academics or even for professors, and in some disciplines it's quite dramatic. But also because some governments, and especially in East Asia, are driving PhD training towards how can I say, state building contribution. And so they would like PhD graduates to contribute to other sectors of society. And there is an interesting distinction in this paper that was made, and it is that it seems so in Asia, in East Asia, this is driven by policy from the government, especially from central governments and authoritarian governments, and it is partly successful, really. But when it comes to the US, this is driven more by market forces, and clearly it is quite successful in particular fields. And our conclusion is that Europe, including Australia, including the UK, is trying to find a way in order to reorganize the research careers in general. So, and by this also reorganizing the academic careers. But again, this seems to come more from the policy level, coordinated probably at times by the Commission, rather than by market forces, so by labor markets and what they really need. So that was it from my side.
Tatiana, thank you very much. The UK case study is illuminating for many reasons. Thank you for your updated picture. Let me say that we may see that PhD graduates that do not enter the academic career may find their way into a satisfactory career elsewhere, hopefully. But still the question is, are we attracting as universities the best PhD graduates. Is the structural career still attractive, or, according to several people and also some discussion before, it's becoming so competitive, and in terms of competition to enter for postdoc, for example, at the entry level of academia, and economically not so rewarding, as you said, in comparison to other careers. What do you think about this issue?
Yes, of course, this is one of the main issues, and I cannot really speak based on systematic data, but it seems to me, again, going back to the ecosystem of research careers and high-skilled careers for high-skilled staff, it seems to me that there is a change also in what, not only there is a change in the supply, but there is a change in the demand from these same PhD holders, and or generally speaking, even just master's graduates. And I think that work-life balance is important, even if we are probably of an older generation and we don't think so, but it is important, and it has become an issue for several large international employers to recruit. So it's not only an issue for universities, but I think that probably if we look at some large international companies that say look for highly skilled engineers and so on, they moved already forwards, and clearly they offer the package they offer in order to be attractive is not only, oh yeah, it's easy, and if you work so much, then you can climb the career ladder and so on, because it seems, but here I'm not a specialist, it seems that those who are job seekers are not that convinced anymore. And so probably universities should think more about that, because it is extraordinarily competitive, and not to mention again some East Asian countries where there are dozens of thousands of academics that are publishing extraordinarily well, and so there will be a moment where we are going to have a systemic problem on how to really measure this competition and how to attract, and at the same, and more recently, of course, there are all the so-called geopolitical instabilities and new conditions. So visa policies are important and can change student flows dramatically, as we saw in the UK with the case of South Asian students some years ago. So it's a difficult balance, I would say.
Okay, Tatiana, absolutely fascinating perspective worldwide, which is also a good way to leave the floor to Marek Kwijek, that has been studying for years the careers across the world and is also actively engaged into issues of standardization of data. Marek, the floor is to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, thank you. I was thinking how to put ETER in the context of measuring academic careers, measuring gender differences in academic careers, how to put ETER somehow in the whole, well, I would say global ecology of various data sources to think about careers. So I'll be linking the ETER story with the previous gender ETER story somehow, because whenever we say academic career, I believe we have a chance and opportunity to make distinctions in measurements between careers for men and careers for women. It's just unthinkable how in the past, say, 5 or 10 years, we are able to measure the details of careers by gender. It was unthinkable. We had for many years, basically for decades, with large data or longitudinal data, we had just scientists. And now we indeed have men and women. So I will try somehow to link the two roundtables. I found the first roundtable enormously interesting, and I had a lot of comments, but maybe I'll put just some of them right now here. So careers and measuring careers. We have a number of sources right now. One is certainly, well, all census data from national statistical offices, all type of national higher education statistics. Now we have ETER, which combines, but not really aggregates, but provides us with access to micro data. Probably the most important difference and the biggest value of ETER is the micro level character of institutional data. So no longer aggregations, no longer averages or medians or whatever, it's micro level data set. So what I see most useful and most interesting in ETER is this micro level attitude and micro level data, which certainly brings me to the point of measuring careers from or based on different data sources. So for instance, when we no longer focus on higher education only, but we focus on scientists or women in science or publishing scientists, we do have European and global data on those who publish. And these, these electronic fingerprints or whatever traces academics leave behind really matter. So I see ETER in the context of other data sets, where I find, well, personally, ETER enormously useful when studying academic careers. It's probably the institutional variable for any type of modeling we can do, where we need where we work with scientists and we need their context. So Marek here in this institution, and we have all type of data for this institution. So in modeling, this contextual variable is enormously important, and we didn't have it before. I greatly appreciate these per gender studies that we discussed in the first roundtable. It's enormously important to know the differences and to produce indexes to show the differences. I strongly believe in, so to speak, women in science. This is untapped potential. Women in science are somehow newcomers, say past 40, 50 years. And we can measure presence of women in science generationally somehow, among young women, among young scientists or older scientists, or the oldest scientists. Something what Alessia said today, okay, what about the oldest generation of women in science compared to the youngest generation? Now, with various types of data, we can compare, well, the presence of oldest and older and old women in particular disciplines compared to the presence of young and youngest scientists. And for a long time, I was thinking, like many of us here, that perhaps the representativeness of women in science is on the rise. And I did a very careful study of STEM disciplines, just STEM disciplines, because I was thinking there will be no difference across disciplines. And I wanted to come to this idea, which was mentioned here today many times, that disciplines matter enormously. But not only it's STEM versus non-STEM, it's within STEM differentiations, enormous within STEM differentiations. So we know the differences between, say, humanities, social sciences, and STEM, and it's okay, but also within STEM. My team studied the differences between the big four, which is computing, mathematics, physics, engineering, compared to all other STEM disciplines, for women and for men over time for the past 30 years. And we can see, and we did it very carefully, that in the big four disciplines, well, situation or the representativeness of women is not really changing. We need another 100 to 150 years to have parity. But I'm returning to the first question, is parity needed? Do we need the, parity or 40-60 bracket in percentage of women in all disciplines? I don't know. It's difficult to say. What we know it is that there are 10 to 20% maximum scientists in mathematics or in physics or in engineering or in computing, and it doesn't change over time. We did a lot of things in the US or in Canada or in the UK to change the proportions, but proportions do not change. So generally ETER and the ecology of different data sources. We have ETER, a European data set. We have global data sets about publishing scientists, but we still have, and we still do surveys when we want to know more than we know and understand more that we understand now. We need surveys and we need interviews. So I'm mentioning in many venues many times that the data themselves are perfect and we need more and more of them. As you said, we are greedy for data. I'm also greedy for data, but I'm also greedy for explanations. Not only the what is perfect, we know more and more, but also the why. And moving from the what to the why is a long way with ETER, with Scopus or Web of Science, or with any type of, well, purely quantitative data. So surveys and also interviews, and then we know more about careers. Well, I don't want to discuss this pyramidal structure, which is just perfect. The 50 rule, so that we have younger generation, older generation, and oldest generation in terms of seniority, and at each step there is 50% less than at the level before. There are many approaches to measuring seniority. This is very good. Another one is years passed since PhD. This is also, say, 10 years after PhD, you are still a junior scholar, or you are other as a postdoc. Or we can measure, in many instances we measure seniority by years passed since the first publication, especially in STEM sciences. So it's a real age, it's academic age, it's age since PhD, and all approaches can be combined or used in other type of data rather than in different type of data. What I wanted to say is that there is a big tension between measuring academic careers and personnel in higher education and measuring scientists, or, well, even publishing academics in higher education, because in many countries these are different populations. So ETER is measuring personnel, which is perfect, but is not exactly publishing scientists as they are measured in Scopus or Web of Science, or even in national databases containing on publications and on publishers. So this tension is very important, especially when we focus on gender issues. It may happen that in some fields or in some institutions, women are not so much underrepresented. Fine. And then we move on to publication data about the very same institutions. And we compare using ETER data, by the way, using ETER data, we use the numbers and we see what is the representation of publishing women and publishing men, and then publishing men and women in top journals. And we can see that the differences are ever bigger when we move from the higher education, say, universe to international indexed of publications universe. So when we think about gender differences, it's important not only to focus on personnel, perfect, very useful data, but also who does what, who publishes where, by men and by women. Now, we have knowledge in ETER about 1,000 institutions. It's absolutely fantastic. My feeling is we need more time to digest what is possible to do with the data. I try to use the data in some models. It works fine as long as we focus on Europe. It's okay. But still, when we compare Europe as a unity to the US, generally our data about academic careers are very, very limited. We don't have really longitudinal type of data, like in the US, 30 years of surveys, longitudinal study design data, after every 3 years or every 5 years or so. So I believe in the power of data in Europe. ETER is an important step forward, but we need more and more, not because we are greedy for data, because European data about academics and European data about academic careers are enormously limited. We are enormously limited nationally, like Poland, exception maybe Italy, exception also, but general across Europe, we have no data or limited data about academic careers and academics compared to the US. We are, I would say, decades behind, or at least a decade and a half behind the US. So we need to produce data. It takes a decade, as in the case of ETER, it takes a decade to produce something, comparable for 40 years, but it's worth it. And I strongly believe in the power of, it's not really big data, but it's bigger than what we had before. Maybe one more thing, it's globally unique undertaking. I mean, ETER, as almost 40 countries, is globally unique. When you forget about the US, globally, no region is so carefully studied. But we know it takes money, it takes personnel, it takes time to do it, and I'm very glad we have it right now. Although I'm still not fully able to use it. We need time to digest what is available in ETER. In ETER, we also probably need. I was thinking we also need examples. What can be done? How others used ETER. I know there is a series of seminars of using ETER data and etc. And within the RISIS scheme, it's very useful. But anyway, we need examples. Finally, maybe just the last word. When we focus on careers and on women careers, we need longitudinal type of data. So not only 2020, but also in 5 and in 10 years time from today. Because whatever is not longitudinal really doesn't take into account the fact that times are changing. Women 10 years ago in science and women today is a different story. We did a huge study of attrition in science, attrition of women 10 years ago until now, and attrition of women from science 20 years ago until now. I would say hundreds of thousands of academics follow over time for years, year by year. And it's just an example. Attrition is absolutely different. Women are disappearing at much larger percentages today than 20 years ago or 15 years ago. So longitudinal data. We have ETER today, but I believe we will have ETER points every next year so that the data finally will become longitudinal. Okay, that's more or less what I wanted to say. I want to say more, but it's just enough.
Well, Marek, you gave so many suggestions. There will be time needed to digest your suggestions. That's something for our further discussion. I see Alesia with raising her hand. Please, Alesia.
Hi, thank you, Marek, for the interesting commentary. And I want to come back to this idea of looking at gender from a subject perspective, and I think that fine-tuning to the culture of the discipline is also actually quite important, because I don't think we can just say, social sciences and humanities and STEM. Because when I reflect more on what's going on even within the social sciences and humanities, I can see that women are not only expected to compete with men for higher roles in the social sciences, but also with each other. Do you know what I mean? So I think we have to take that into account, because I don't think in STEM, in some of these areas where there are fewer women, for example, in engineering, think of some of these fields where the women actually stand out as being quite unique. So, for example, in philosophy, we have only one woman tenured professor in our department, one woman. And she's doing extremely well. She pulls in a lot of grant money and she's quite well known. But it seems to me that she doesn't have any competition with other women. So it seems interesting, whereas in certain fields in social sciences, and I can reflect on mine, there are a lot of women professors, a lot of women associates. And so women in competition with women is a bigger thing in social sciences, I would say. I would say in philosophy, that's an anomaly when it comes to the humanistic endeavors. There's much fewer women. Women stand out more, have maybe more opportunities, because it would look really bad to have 1 or 2 women that never get anywhere. Likewise, in some really strong engineering fields. I don't know, electrical engineering, for example, we have very small proportion of women. It looks bad if they don't get anywhere. And yet for me, if I don't get anywhere, it's like, oh, well, there's lots of women like me who wouldn't. Do you see what I mean? So they have more luxury of picking the outstanding women in certain social science fields where there's a lot of women anyway. So I'm not sure if this indicator, that's another reflection on the indicator, because if you look at the proportion of women in the senior roles, and then even if that proportion is equal, you might have a lot of disproportionate women anyways in this middle level. Do you see what I mean? Like there's always lots of women in the social sciences.
Yeah,
I don't know if that makes sense. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm just thinking again on this issue of focusing on discipline, because yeah, it's not just, you know, promoting women in science and whatnot, because you could say, well, then there's a lot of women in the social sciences that are keeping each other company at these low grade levels.
Marek, do you want to react?
Oh yes, if I can, just I would say we studied carefully disciplines, and what let's focus on 1 year. Let's say last year. The competition between old women is enormous, while the competition between young women is very, very small. So in the very same year, a cross-sectional approach, you have 10 times difference between women and men in the very same discipline, say medicine, and in the very same year you have just 50-50 difference, or competition between 50% of men and 50% of women. So the whole structure of academic profession is changing in most STEM disciplines. So the difference by 10 goes down to the difference by 1 or the difference by 5, and it's just within 1 year. While in other disciplines, you mentioned philosophy, but I would say it's mathematics or physics and astronomy or computing, there is exactly the same percentage of young women and a bit older women and the oldest women, and there are no changes over time. So in most disciplines, you have sometimes even majority of young women among young scientists, and in other disciplines, there are no differences, and these are all within STEM. So I believe in the power of disciplines. I even calculated here another kind of index for you, like relative representation of senior women by discipline. And I put it like this: percent of senior male scientists within a discipline divided by all men percentage of all men in this discipline, and then again divided by percentage of senior female scientists divided by percentage of all women in this discipline. And when it is 1, the representation is equal. When it's more than 1, it means there are more male scientists in senior roles. And when it's lower than 1, it means that there are more female scientists in senior roles. It's very similar to your indicator, except for it's somehow normalized to the number of scientists within a discipline. Certainly, when you have 1 philosopher, that doesn't make sense to produce any probability to produce any indicators, but in large numbers, it should be working. So it's percentage divided by percentage, divided by percentage divided by percentage. And
but
then
why is the attrition rate for women more today?
Yeah.
Why?
Why? Because we are in a very unstable, institutional surrounding, and also academy is not so attractive. I wouldn't say 10% of women are disappearing because they are kicked out. Perhaps 10% of women disappear because they are disappointed. It's difficult without surveys to say whether it's voluntary or involuntary, but all we know is that women disappear from science at higher proportions than men, and all disappear. It's either attractiveness, it's voluntary living, involuntary living. Anyway, attrition happens. Today, it's 10% every year by year, where for the last decade. So we know it just happens, but I would say it concerns also attractiveness of a profession. Women see, and we all see, maybe it's not so bloody attractive as it was when we were doing our PhD, so 2-3 years ago. It's not only kicking out, it's not only, so pressure, competition, it's also pure disappointment, the great resign, as in US, we just resign in numbers. Without surveys of interviews, we can't say what the reason is.
Well, wasn't there was an article about Higgs, the Higgs boss physicist. He said he would never have been a Nobel Prize or professor today. He wouldn't be compared to what he was. He wasn't, his publication rate was extremely low. And yet he did some kind of slow amount of work and then got a Nobel Prize for it, but.
If you ask me personally, I'm for competition, I'm for high pressure, I'm for 60 hours work per week, because it's standard in science. It's standard in science. It's not in higher education, but in science, if you need results, you need to work, and pressure is okay. So I don't buy these stories from Nobel Prizes winners. Generally, I don't believe in the advancement of science without some pressures and competition and hard work, but I'm a very traditional person.
Marek, thank you. I need to leave the floor to Maria Cristina.
Thank you so much. Well, speaking about senior and junior, old women and young women is a little bit disappointing. In my opinion, the main problem is, could we stand? Could we accept all these excellent scientists abandoning just because they are fed up? We have spent a lot of public money forming them, educating them, preparing them, giving them good laboratories. They have made excellent PhDs, excellent postdocs, excellent papers. And then 30 years after, they find themselves looking at their own students going and progressing academically while they are still giving the classes to the first-year students. And at the end of the day, they say, I'm a little bit fed up. I would like to be in this lovely afternoon of the month of June at the beach, or making a lovely promenade or whatever else. That is the terrible problem. Professor Quick has explained that the attrition is higher now than ever. Are we really surprised about hearing that? And the next question is that fruitful for us as the university, as the science system, having a lot of brilliant, productive scientists going out just because they are tired of the sticky floor or the glass ceiling or whatever things that are in the middle? The paper I have made placed in the chat is very, very, very informative about that. Maybe it's not the quantitative data which is important, it's the qualitative data which is important. Because the ladies that abandoned it and explained why they abandoned the highest level of research in medicine in London explained very clearly the why. So maybe we must make a common reflection about how to better treat our students from the pre-graduate to the graduate and beyond, and how to avoid missing brilliant scientists that went out bored of being mistreated at the end of a 30 or 40 years career. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria Cristina. Let me formulate the issue and then ask again to our speakers. It may be possible that this attrition depends also from external opportunities. The people in science may go elsewhere, find a job in the non-university sector, still in science, or go to the industry, okay? But the question is for universities. Given a higher level of attrition, which comes from a higher level of competition, are we selecting according to good criteria? Is resilience or perseverance always correlated to, positively, strongly correlated to the unobserved ability of junior researchers to contribute to science? Or are we losing skills, we as the university system? I see again Maria Cristina replying probably to this question.
Well, Professor Easterman commented about the accreditation in the Spanish system. The accreditation in the Spanish system is essentially asking you if you are the alpha male of the group. If you sing the first one, if you are the IP, the only IP, for years in the public big projects of research, it was only one IP possible, not two co-IPs or three co-IPs from three different institutions. No, only one. So if we play the alpha male game, okay, I'm not a male. That's the end of the story. That's the end of the story. And many of my colleagues feel the same. If we are playing that you have 134 points more than the other one, it's not something really reliable. Okay? And even worse, if the price of not being the first one is having much more classes to do, so not having so much time to doing research, the perfect spiral down is built. So it depends on how you evaluate the academical task. If only some particular tasks and some particular results are considered valuable, and all the rest is just, let's say, music for the water, that's it. Okay, you are nothing because you are only giving classes, or you are only forming the PhDs. But then when they go up for a postdoc, you miss them, and they disappear. And that is mainly the question. Maybe we are not making the right questions. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria Cristina. I see Alesia and probably someone else. Alesia, go short.
Yeah, just shortly. Yeah, I think high pressure is always going to be a part of science, but I think the way to offset that is for more inclusion, more teamwork, more collaboration. And that will help women to what do you call it, balance better. Because if they're left alone, it's game over.
Thomas, come on.
Yeah, I think to your last question, Andrea, about if we're losing out on talent, I think an important part is really how we assess academic careers and what are the sorts of evaluation criteria. And of course, this is a very vast field that, I mean, we can't just start this up and now at the end. But I think that is also a very important part, to have a very balanced trajectory of what we actually evaluate, where we want to have our senior academic careers move into, what are the skills, what are the capacities. So it goes also in the whole question of much better balance between learning and teaching and research and innovation activities. So that is a whole aspect. But I think also in terms of and making the link again to the leadership, I mean, we also need academic careers that also are actually willing to take up leadership roles within our institutions. I mean, this is a huge question also in terms of transition, and also how we find people that actually are willing to take up these careers. So that is also a whole composition now that is very, very important, and skills like you mentioned, resilience, but also taking the lead, communication. I mean, there's a whole set of skills that are important also for academic careers, and that should also be taken into account.
Okay. Again, very, very interesting comments. May I ask to the floor whether they have other comments? Or maybe if Tatiana or Marek may want to add something after this round of discussion. Tatiana, I see you.
Yes. I think.
Meanwhile, you have changed your screen.
Yeah, because I changed room. I shouldn't be saying that. So I think yes. What do we measure when we measure talent and so on? That's clearly how we evaluate. And I completely agree that we are still, at least culturally, in this bullying alpha male prototype that always arrives first, always get other people do the job, and then is kind of everywhere with a high visibility. And I think actually I agree with Thomas that a key word that we probably need to elaborate more or discuss is leadership. So when someone should show leadership in teaching, in research, in external engagements, in organizational citizenship, and leadership can be not only interpreted, but it can be articulated in different ways. So it can be leadership because one become, I don't know, the dean, but it can also be leadership because there is a new field that has been established, a new research center, a new, so in some way is all the layers that we have built in this last decades of indicators of excellence, maybe they should just be reduced to two layers. And one is showing leadership at different levels, so junior, mid-career, and senior positions, and the other one is your field, is your scholarship and your field of expertise. And if you do this, you can be inclusive of different type of leadership, and you can be a leader in teaching, you can be a leader in innovation, you can be a leader in just, I don't know, external consultancy, etc. And I think this is something that is quite, now I don't know how much impactful it is, but it's quite the narrative here in the UK. And maybe it's a way to reassess a talent instead, because now the publications indicator, well, that's very good because of course that shows leadership and that shows academic impact. But when we start to have, as I said before, so many academics publishing so much with so many journals and so on, and I'm sure Marek could speak about this for hours. How can you really indicate and highlight your leadership? Is one way to do it, but you need to have other ways. And here I think, as it was mentioned before, of course, the funding agencies have a lot of they can show their own leadership, and in fact here in the UK they have changed some of the criteria, for instance the principal investigator and how you integrate into group early career researchers, etc. And they expect that a certain how can I say, basic commitments to fairness and inclusion are respected by the funder. And when you apply for funding, of course, you are applying with your university. So this become also your university policy.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. Okay. Are there other comments? I don't see other hands, so I would like to ask again David to contribute to the discussion, to offer his comments after the second roundtable about careers. And then probably if Kinga is still with us, maybe some final comment before Benedetto and myself closing the session could be arranged. David, sorry, not Daniel.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was someone else.
Daniel is Wagner Schuster on our project. David, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Thanks. Well, yeah, another fascinating exchange and roundtable, and I think there's lots of things that really can be explored. I think the first thing that I want to say goes back to what Thomas said right at the beginning, which is that it's important both to use data and also to link data, to link the data which may be available in a range of different projects and sources, and data of different types. As Thomas also mentioned, that it's important to have both quantitative and qualitative data to get to a good understanding of the developments. And Marek also picked up about the poor quality of data that we have in relation to academic careers in Europe. So I think first point is that we need to continue really focusing on improvement of data and making the best use possible of the data that we have in terms of policy developments. And then the second point for me is that I think we really need the policies, because I was very struck by Tatiana's kind of overview of the situation in the UK. In particular, the statistic of from the HEPI report of the number of short-term contracts, the 33% short-term. So, in my mind, it becomes very difficult to reconcile how you can have a system which is fair, inclusive, and you've got a third of staff on precarious work contracts. It's so there's and there's clearly some serious issues which are underlying that reality. And of course, I don't think that's a reality which is reserved for the UK. So I think we can see many, and it's an area where data is difficult. To get data on very short-term contract staff, and this is not always the type of data which is easy to get and easy to understand what people are doing on those contracts. So so I think we need to look at that. One other aspect which I thought didn't really come through to my mind, but in the discussion very much, but which I think is important, is the capacity for systems to be fair to those that don't have the typical academic route. So in other words, how open are academic posts for people coming with experience in different industry backgrounds, and are they able to be integrated in an equitable way? So are they treated fairly? Are people in an academic, when we talk about the high level of attrition, but is it possible to be going out into other kind of types of work and come back into academia? So these kind of aspects of career paths, because I don't think we live in the kind of world now where you go into a job and you stay in the same field of work, or in many typical career paths have just completely changed. We tend to now see a variety of movement and development, and we want to encourage that, but we need to have system design to enable that. So I think this is also important to look at, and overlooking all of this is kind of questions about whether because we're talking about initially about sustainable academic career paths. So have we got sustainable funding in our academic environments? How do we assess whether it's sustainable? I mean, I can see that if you look over just data of percentage of funding, GDP per capita funding into higher education in Europe over the last 20 years, it's been going down. So, but I know that if you look at the demands on higher education in terms of numbers of students, different demands in society, the demands are increasing, but the public funding at least is not, and it's decreasing in many cases. So so I don't think you can really have a serious discussion about sustainable career paths if you've got unsustainable funding of higher education. So so I think that needs to be linked. I think it was very interesting that Thomas pointed out that there was a link between autonomy and gender in terms of the senior positions. So that there could be something in that needs to be explored as well. And I think the last thing I want to say is that I'm not a big fan of this use of term resilience. I'm not a big fan of using it in relation to, it kind of gives the impression, I completely agree that we live in a world where the people are going to be competing. There's going to be a lot of pressure and tensions which you have to deal with in academic careers. But I don't think it's healthy to talk about resilience in the way in which it can be misused, that the more you can cope with and still keep going, that's somehow a good way to kind of manage particularly early stage academic careers. And survival of the fittest type approach to early stage academia. So yeah, I think we need serious kind of discussion. I mean, I thought this was very serious discussion, but we need a lot of it. We probably need it at a lot more localized levels. But I think we also need to have I think it's great that the European Commission is kind of addressing this issue of sustainable academic careers, and that it's going to come to kind of put a kind of framework across the union for this. So I think, and there has to be data, developing data has to be part of this, but there's a lot of reflection around the societal developments as well, which are, and how they're impacting on the academic world, which I think also needs to go into the reflection. So that's where I would end up on this. So thank you everybody for the input, because I found it really fascinating.
Thank you, David, for this wonderful summary of our discussion. Sustainability in another reading of the word. Benedetto has raised his hand. Benedetto.
Yes, thank you. It has been a fascinating discussion. I would like to add 3 more humble data or approach-related points. The first one is that it may look surprising, but it's the first time that we are starting to discuss what is the perimeter of academics, what means counting academics. We all tend to have a clear definition, but when you start looking to the data, you discover that it's not the case. And on the one hand, there is the distinction between academics in Eurostat terms, academic personnel involved in research and teaching, and publishing scholars. which is what we get from databases like Scopus and author identifiers. And then there are issues whether we would consider PhD students as academic personnel, or just at helper personnel. And this has a huge impact because in research universities makes 1/3 of the personnel engaged in research and teaching. So it makes a huge difference. And I can't tell you how many problems we have in ETER for the delimitation of personnel concerning healthcare, where the situation in statistical data ranges from cases where hospitals are completely excluded to cases where you include even nurses and the caregivers with no research and educational activity. So I think it's the first time, and finally with discussion with OECD and Eurostat is starting to notice that we need to understand what is covered by this data. Otherwise, we are really black boxing things and using figures without knowing what is inside. And we are starting to make some comparison between ETER, for example, and Scopus authors, and you see clearly some general patterns. The second one is coming back to the value of ETER, and I don't want to exaggerate the value, but we are speaking of academic careers like there would be just one institution per country, and that's academic careers. So one first things for me would be to start looking where people are distributed geographically among institutions, in which types of institutions. And we know there are clear patterns. So we know, for example, in terms of academic personnel, research university is far larger than any other institution, and the imbalance in terms of ratio students to staff are huge. So you can have Hogescholen with 50,000 students and just 1/3 of the personnel in Oxford, or ETH at Zurich with 15,000 students. So the imbalances are huge. So one very simple task would be to start looking where people are distributed, and maybe we start now having the seniority level, which might help a little bit. And the third one, it's maybe it's a professional problem. Most of us around this table are academics, and we made our career and we managed to stay in academia. So our ideal is that people should stay and stabilize into academia, which is an interesting sociological mechanism. Now, the question is whether this is really the good perspective on academic careers in the current mass higher education system. I would not doubt that in the 50 years ago, 70 years ago, this would have been a good framework. But now one might argue that the higher education trains also skilled people which do research for the private economy, for the public administration, etc. So that what matters is not academic careers, but is careers. What the taxpayers don't want is that you train 5 years a PhD students, 3 years postdoc, highly skilled, and then it goes to the post office stamping papers. That's clearly a waste of resources. But if the same person does not make an academic career, and you find him or her in a highly skilled place in research policy, for example, then it might have been a good investment. So from a public policy perspective, things might look different than from an academic professorial perspective. And this calls for an important agenda, maybe also for the observatory. There are data on labor force and labor force qualification and human resources in research, which are broader than the data we have on academic personnel. And in some way, we would start needing investigating the interface between this kind of data, because maybe we could come to the conclusion, sad for us, or we might be the few survivors of this fight, but it might be that we find that our colleagues or the 9 colleagues who left on the road have better jobs, more skilled in the private industry or in the public admin than us. And then we would maybe have a different view about precarity of careers. So this is just to be a bit self-reflective on this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Benedetto. Let me check whether Kinga is still with us. Maybe she wants to make a comment, or she left. Kinga, do you want to give a final comment? No? Okay. Okay, we are perfectly on time, which is what you expected from a Swiss coordinator of ETER. Although, as you know, from the University of Italy and Switzerland, which is an oxymoron by nature about the ability to stay on time. We will provide some summary of the discussion. We will also circulate the document with the initial data that I provided to show you in a longer format with a policy brief from RISIS and ETER. Let me thank you warmly, all of you, for the high quality discussion, intellectually challenging and politically very relevant. I hope we can continue the discussion, and for people working with ETER data, there will be, of course, a large agenda to be pursued. Benedetto, maybe you want to add something else?
Yes, to remind on the one hand that we will have many events around ETER and RISIS in the coming months. So we will have again the seminars. So we will be organizing training. I think Georg can give you more details because we really think using the data it's very important. So we have a set of training activities and seminars presenting results in fall. And I'm looking to Alessia. RISIS is also organizing many different activities, including a large final conference in Vienna, where we will have a dedicated session to it. Maybe you would like to say a few words on that.
Yes, we will have this final conference in Vienna, so I invite you to follow us on our social media and on the RISIS website that is strictly collaborating with ETER to disseminate the important use of data and of ETER dataset, obviously. Thank you so much for joining this activity, this policymaker session. As Professor Bonaccorsi told you, we disseminate the policy brief in some days in order to have the complete view of this very, very precious work. Thank you again.
Okay. Thank you, Alessia. And again, thank you very much for everybody that attended this long, hot, and challenging discussion. Thank you.